Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about a very important anniversary coming up. Now, a little later this month, we will reach the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. Armistice Day, as we called it, but there were other days that were celebrated. We had the false armistice, which was on November the 9th, 1918, and an awful lot happened that day, and I wanted to talk about it. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting about it is I remember going to a talk years ago. Try to remember exactly where it was. But the thing is that the speaker was Helen Hayes, the actress. And in her talk, she was talking about various things and her beginnings in the theater in the early teens. And she said in her talk, basically she said, we were in the theater and someone ran in and said Caruso was going to sing. She said we all got up and ran to Times Square. We went to the corner of 42nd and Broadway. And what was there? The Knickerbocker Hotel. And the Knickerbocker Hotel was one of the finest hotels in New York City. It was also a place where a number of people lived, including the operatic tenor Enrico Caruso. Also, come to think of it, George M. Cohan lived there as well. So there was this massive crowd all around the Times Square area, around the Knickerbocker, and out came Caruso. And he sang the national airs of the United States, and of France, and of Italy. And interesting thing was he led them along, and it was a big, joyous affair, but it was the wrong day, but nobody knew it at the time. But the war was essentially over for some people, because there will be a lot more people hurt and killed, which I will talk about a little later. Now, the interesting thing is this, that he came out, he did this, and it was a great, exciting thing, and everybody was blown away by it. Now, here's the other fascinating point, if you think about it. And it's very hard for people to relate today because, today we're so used to noise in New York City where everything is loud. Can you imagine someone without amplification is way up toward the top floor of the Knickerbocker, which at the time was one of the tallest buildings in the Times Square area. And he sang and he didn't need amplification. Everybody heard him. That's how quiet it was. And he sang. Now, it's just a few days away from 100 years ago. And when seeing Helen Hayes speak about this, it was one of those amazing things that stuck in my mind. I was fascinated by Caruso when I was very young. And so it was neat to hear from someone who was there, although it was not a conversation, it was just listening. However, 1982, I was invited to a party. I really didn't want to go, but I was dragged along by a friend by the name of Frank Gambity. And this was an older crowd, and I was, I guess, the youngest one there by far. But that was no problem. I could hold my own in conversation. And got there, and there was a group of elder statesmen, one might put it this way, and they all were interested in classical music and opera and stuff like that. And so I was loving every minute of this. And finally, one of the individuals there, I remember him, I can't remember his name. He was wearing overalls and looking very much comfortable. And he said, well, Francis and I used to do this and that, and ba, 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 ba. And he would go on and on, often mentioning Francis. And I'm trying to think, who's Francis? And so I was told that he was the partner of Francis Robinson, who had been the general manager, the assistant manager, or press person. He was little Mr. Metropolitan Opera at the Met for many, 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 many years. This was his partner. And Francis Robinson had died, which I was aware of. He had written that fantastic book called Enrico Caruso, His Life in Pictures, which I had. And so I sat there and worked my way over to him, and we started talking. And we started talking about all kinds of different stuff. And he said, you know, you like Caruso. He said, I saw him sing. And I said, oh, tell me about this. And he said, when I was a little boy, he said I was 5, 6 years old or something like that, they announced that Caruso was going to sing. And he said his mother dressed him up in fancy knickers and everything else with a big bow tie. And he went to 42nd Street and Broadway. And he said Caruso came out like a cuckoo clock and started to sing. And he waved and he encouraged everyone to sing with him. And then he waved and went back in like a cuckoo clock. That's the way he described it. And so I finally got to meet somebody who was there. And I can't think of his name. I wish I knew. Very nice fellow. We talked about all kinds of stuff. We talked about opera and Ernestine Schumann Heint. And used to talk about listening to her on the radio and all that stuff. And after a long conversation, he looked at me and he said, you know, Francis would have loved you. And I thought that was really sweet. But that was the individual who had been there that I got to talk to, although they were only 6 at the time. And this was 1982. And I was sitting there saying, my goodness, that was like 64 years ago. And you have to understand, I was, 25 years old or 26 years old. And I'm sitting with a bunch of people that were close to my age now, Well, actually, older, quite a bit older than I am now. And so Caruso sang that day. But as I mentioned to you, the anniversary of November 9th, the false armistice, is one of great pain in the memory of people in my family. My grandfather was fighting in World War I. He was in all the major battles in the trenches. And on November the 9th, 1918, he was hit and badly wounded. The back of his whole leg was ripped apart. And so he crawled into the bushes because there were shots and shells going on. War was still taking place. And he was wearing this ring. And he was moving and thrashing around. And the light of it, the reflection of it, hitting the sunlight, got the attention of someone. They saw it. And they ran over to him and took a gun and made a tourniquet around because an artery had been ripped open. He was in pretty rough shape. He was dragged away from there and put into a temporary hospital, which was like a circus tent with big poles. It got hit by a bomb, and the poles collapsed and killed just about everybody in the tent. And he was alive, and he could hear the voices outside saying, they're all dead. And he was screaming, I'm alive. Well, he was saved. That's why I'm here. But when I think 100 years ago, November 9th, 1918, just a few days from now, will be that magnificent anniversary of Caruso singing. And it'll be a kind of a sad anniversary of remembering my grandfather and his severe wounding during World War I remember as a boy talking to him, and he used to put this big strapped up thing on his leg to hold his leg together because it was a mess. It was down to the bone in various areas. And he used to tell me stories about World War I. But I used to ask about the battlefields, and he would never tell me. That must have been a horrific, terrible time. And even when a song would be played called My Buddy, Nights Are Long Since You've Gone Away, that song, he used to just break down in tears. It must have been a lot of pain, I'm sure. And so I can only imagine what he went through. Just a few days from today. 2 anniversaries that happened on the same day. One which was to the benefit of the world, and the other was just something that was important to a family. So, just thinking of you, Pop-Pop, as I used to call him. And of course, always thinking of you, Enrico Caruso. Have a good day.